Good evening. It's 6 o'clock on Wednesday, May the 19th. We are here this evening to give an overview about the preliminary annual operating capital improvement budget for the city for fiscal year 21-22, and also have a brief PowerPoint to talk about the Federal Recovery Act money. So we're going to do it in three parts tonight. First, Director Robin Bird will give a PowerPoint presentation and overview about the budget. Then our Assistant Director will present a PowerPoint pertaining to the Federal Recovery Act monies. And then we'll be available, all of us, for suggestions and questions and answers. So thank you for being here and part of this tonight.
Thank you, City Manager Carmody. It's my pleasure tonight to introduce and present to you the preliminary 21-22 budget for the City of West Covina. I want to go over for a minute just the agenda. We're going to do an overview and review the assumptions that we used for building this budget. We're going to start out at more of a micro or a macro level and move down to a micro level, which will be focused on the general fund. So we'll look at our general fund revenues and expenditures. And then we'll briefly talk about the CIP and go over the next steps in this process, and there will be time at the end for questions. Budget facts, you remember last year, March 16th, the governor and the country, we declared a national pandemic. There was anticipated to be a major loss of sales tax revenue. It didn't end up being as bad as it could have been. A lot of that was because of the online sales and people shopping that way, so that kind of held us up. But we had a loss of city business with all the closures of restaurants and the mall and every business in the city. Many people lost their jobs in West Covina, and then there was talk about a potential second wave. In addition to that, we continue to see rising costs in all services that we provide to the citizens. We used a very conservative approach in preparing the budget, as we always do. And this year there's a structural deficit of $2.3 million, which I'll talk about in some slides later on. We're going to briefly discuss the overtime issue that we have for both police and fire. And then West Covina Sportsplex and the health department are not included in this budget, and our feeling is that once we get more direction from the city council and know what we're going to do, and we develop those budgets, we'll bring that back to the city council at a later date. But I will say that they are not supposed to impact the general fund. This budget was a rollover budget, and when I say rollover budget, meaning basically took the numbers from last year and rolled them over to this year, unless there were situations that we actually knew that costs were going to increase and we would have to pay those costs no matter what. So we started out just moving the numbers over and then whittled away and worked with the departments on that. We continued to identify general fund expenditures that could be paid out of special funds so that we can maximize the use of those funds and eliminate those costs going into the general fund. For the last 2 years, we've been evaluating ongoing contracts, and as they come due, examine them, look at them, see if we should go out for bid, try to get lower prices, and that's an ongoing process that we continue to do today. And then we anticipate salary savings through attrition, in particular in the police department. Now we're going to look at all funds, revenues, and expenditures. On the revenue side, for all the funds of the city, we have $145.7 million, with the general fund being 47% of that. On the expenditure side, you have a $159.6 million in expenditures, and the general fund, again, is 42% of that. Now, the difference between the revenue and the expenditure, you might ask yourself why such a large difference. In the special funds, a lot of times we accumulate funds year after year because we don't get enough revenue in one year to complete a project, so we accumulate those funds and then we'll spend them out. So expenditures typically are higher than the revenues across all funds. This is the same 159.6 million. It just shows you the different categories and how things are split up. And you see salaries and benefits and maintenance and operations are both 29%. Our capital projects and equipment purchases are 27%, and our debt service is 15%. We're going to move on to the general fund. And on this graph here, I put revenues in the blue line and expenditures in the red line. I took 7 years of data and to compare that, and you can see that in a lot of the years our expenditures were quite a bit higher than our revenues coming in. So in those years we were spending down our reserves. I will tell you, and I'll explain it more in the next slide, in the 21-22 proposed column there's $2.3 million that we put into the revenue that'll come out of the reserves to balance the budget this year. And then we have this graph. It's $67.8 million, and you can see property tax and sales tax, which makes up 65% of our budget. They're our two largest revenue sources. And we, at the bottom of this graph, you can see fund balance at 3%. That's the $2.3 million that I was talking about that we're using this year to fill the gap for the loss of revenue that we had. I want to make sure that you understand that we only use that if the revenues don't come in. If we open up June 15th, if people begin to travel again, our TOT is going to go up. And there was a loss of TOT of about $600,000 that we project. If people get out there and they get their jobs back, they're going to be out there spending money. Our sales tax is going to go up. So I'm hoping that a lot of this will wash out and we won't have to use the full $2.3 million. That $2.3 million, the expenditures this year only increased 1.7%. That's not a lot in the general fund. And if you look at the other side of it on the revenue side, our sales tax was down $1 million. Our TOT is $600,000. Our Prop A was $300,000. And our false alarm program that we don't do anymore was $100,000 in revenue. And then there was a contractor's license fee that we no longer collect of $300,000. That adds up to the $2.3 million. So if all of our revenues came back, with the exception of the contractor's license, we would be back to even again. And then I wanted to show in this slide, we have 13 years of data here. It's our property tax revenue from 09-10 to 21-22, and you can see that it's been a very stable revenue source for the city and continues to go up. It's not a lot every year, but it's going up. The last year it went up 100,000, 28.1 to 28.3. I did the same thing with sales tax, and you can see, again, it's a very stable revenue source for us. I took the first 8 years, and you can see the growth. It continued to climb, and the last 6 years it's been relatively flat. It fluctuates a little bit, goes up and down, but it's also been a very stable revenue source. This slide here, I took our two largest revenue sources, property tax and sales tax, and I put it alongside police and fire expenditures. There's, you can see in the first 5 years, our expenditures for public safety were a lot higher than those two revenue sources, and in these last 2 years, you can see that the revenues are a little bit higher now. than our expenditures. And I think we've done that with cutting costs and streamlining things more without sacrificing the services that we get from public safety. The expenditure side, we have $67.8 million, and again, police and fire make up the biggest part of that at 60%. And you can see how labor-intensive the services are that we provide. Our salaries and benefits make up 61% of that, and our maintenance and operations is 39%. And I did a slide of police and fire overtime, and I did it through 1920 because I had the actuals for those years, and you can see that the overtime is about $2.9 million for police in the last year, in 1920, $2.6 million for the fire. We also attached to the budget agenda item last night the report that we had done on the fire department services. We continue to look for alternative services, and that's an ongoing situation that we're going to have to address in this coming year. So our fund balance at June 30, 21, which is coming up here in just over a month, we expect our total fund balance to be $21.4 million. And then we have $3.5 million of that is non-spendable. And what those are is loans that the successor agency in particular, that was the biggest one up until this last year where we got another big chunk paid down. And then this will be the last year that that'll be on there. We'll collect that entire amount. But those are things that are non-spendable. So as those amounts go down, that $3.5 million goes down, it switches and goes into the unassigned fund balance. So our unassigned fund balance is going up to, we project, to $17.8 million. Now I want to make sure that everybody understands it's a projection. I'm still, now that I have the finance department fully staffed, we're focusing on a lot of cleanup that needs to be done, and these numbers could change and they could go down just because I know there's entries that need to be made from years before I was here, and we want to get that done this year if we can, at least by the end of next year. So our unassigned fund balance as a percentage of operating expenditures is going to be around 26.8%. Again, on this one, I took general fund balance. These are straight out of the CAFRs. And for 15 years of data. And you can see in those early years, we were spending down reserves in 06, 07, 07, 08 at about $10 million a year. And then our lowest dip was in 12, 13, 13, 14. That was the dissolution of redevelopment. And when that happened, because a lot of that money that went into redevelopment would come back in payments to the city because of the loans and things, that a lot of that stuff was denied by the Department of Finance. And then it went up in 14, 15. A lot of that was because, as they did that dissolution, everybody was sort of feeling their way through and figuring out how we implement all this. So they then re-allowed some things to go back on the books, and it raised it. But then after that, it started to dip again. And in the last 2 years, it's starting to go back up on the upswing. So I think we're on the right track there. Capital improvement program. For 2021, we have $6.6 million in capital that we're doing this year. It jumps to 38.7 in 21-22, and the main reason for that is if you look at the second line that says general, there's approximately $20 million that we're getting in relief funds. Now, I put it in the CIP. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to stay there and it's all going to be for capital. We've yet to determine that. One of the eligible uses for it is to replenish for loss of revenue because of COVID and because of the $2.3 million gap. If the council directs us to do so, we will probably fill that gap with those ARA funds. The relief funds. And then this is just another way of depicting the slide that I just showed you, so you can see that big orange pot of money there. And again, that could or could not stay. We have not identified. We've identified some needs that we have. We have not identified use for all of those monies. When Stephanie will talk more about that as we switch over to her presentation. So our next steps, we're going to bring this back to the council on June 15th for adoption. We're going to need to monitor the revenues and expenditures timely, and so we'll be bringing quarterly reports as we have in the past and make the necessary adjustments to the budget. We need to shift from reactive to preventive maintenance. Things are falling apart in the city around our ears. We need to adhere to our adopted budget policies. We need to prepare a plan to resolve the general fund structural deficit and maintain general fund reserves per the city policy. And then lastly, we've made a lot of progress, I think, with our 9 different unions, but we need to continue that interest-based bargaining going into the future. Last night, we stopped here for questions. You went.
I really appreciate the people that took the time to come tonight. And I'd like to pause now for questions. If I could lead with one I got today from a resident. I think this might be a good time for them. We've got the luxury of time. The question is, in the opinion of the staff, we've got some real talent here working on this budget for us. What should the residents focus on as they consider this budget? What do you believe to be, in your professional opinion, the most important issues facing the city right now? Is that your most recent slide? Is that the things that the city should be worried about? Robin, what do you recommend the attention be directed toward?
Well, we have an endless list of things that need to be done. With the issuance of the pension obligation bonds, that's given us some relief in this year to get some of the projects done that we need to do. We're far from getting, to the point where I think the staff or the residents want us. Graffiti's a big issue right now. Staffing levels are cut to the bone, and one guy on graffiti cannot keep up with all the calls. I forget the number that you gave last night, but it's significant. I'm not sure. I don't believe there's been 2 guys since I've been here. I think it's just been one. It might have been with the layoffs. I'm not sure. That was before my time. But
Okay, well, that's a good answer. I really like that we have communication protocols, so I'm going to ask Mark to call our speakers. If we don't have a communication protocol, I think we have communication chaos. So, Mark, if you would call JD or Jim or Jerry in order, and we can take their questions and answer. Thank you all for being here. You may, but you mind? We're streaming this meeting. Okay.
In the past, when we had budget workshops, they were more informal than a regular. That's it.
Okay.
All right. Tonight, actually, we only have one speaker card, and that is from Mr. Jim Grivage.
And if you wouldn't mind using the microphone, this is being streamed. We wanted to afford an opportunity for people that maybe chose not to or couldn't be here to listen in.
I have some questions, and some of them are detailed. It might be more appropriate that I have a meeting with financial staff rather than do it here, but I'll give you some.
Well, we would welcome that as well. It's entirely up to you.
Because there's, let me just give you an example. When we were doing all of our discussion about the pension obligation bonds, it was my understanding that the city this last fiscal year, the one we're still in, would receive an infusion of roughly $10 million in cash because they were under no obligation to make a payment. on the pension obligation bonds, but they realized an excess of money coming in. They received more money coming in than they needed to pay PERS. And my understanding was that amount of money was about $10 million. And when I looked at the presentation, it didn't look, the numbers didn't come out even. It looked based on the presentation that the city's balance only improved about $5 million rather than $10 million as a result. In other words, there's a disconnect, and so that was an issue. I guess all I'm saying is there some kind of simplified revenue expenditures excluding pension obligation? Putting that on the side of last year. When I say last year, I mean the fiscal year we're still in. Sorry, hard to do this when we're talking about this year's budget. Revenue this year, expenditures this year, excluding the pension obligation bonds. And I presume that in those terms that there would be some kind of deficit. And the pension obligation money would come in to repair the deficit and actually infuse cash into the city. And those are the numbers I'm looking for.
So there was approximately, and I have exact numbers upstairs, but 12 or 13 million, might have been 11, I'm not quite off the top of my head, that we normally make a payment July 31 to CalPERS for our annual payment for the unfunded liability. And we do that because we save significant money, and I believe it was about $500,000 if we paid it up front. However, we issued pension obligation bonds July 30th or 29th and made the payment to CalPERS. And when I say we made the payment, that money never actually came to the city. It went, the bonds closed, the money went to CalPERS right now.
Yeah, but you paid off the whole liability, not just the 1 year obligation.
Right, but we didn't have to make that annual payment, which was already in the budget. So that $11+ million was in the budget. Now, if you go back and you look at the first quarter, second quarter, especially the second quarter, I don't think we did a first quarter. The second quarter, there was some changes that were made to the budget, and to keep it in balance, we lowered that 11 million. So, it's just taking it from one pot and putting it into another, basically. So as things came up during the year.
Okay, thank you.
So as things came up during the year, and there were several things, and I can go back over those journal entries.
So the total may have been $5 million or so, because that was the number that looked short. But basically, during this fiscal year, the one we're in now, there was roughly $5 million of money moved from the reserves, which the source of that money was in effect, the profit from the bonds. And so that's why the amount of money that's available now is only roughly $5 million.
Except with the statement that it was moved out of reserves, it was not. It's just a function of the accounting. It all went through the revenue and expenditure side, the income statement, if you will.
I know. I had quite a discussion with the auditor about this, because I actually did the same thing once in my career, and we treated the bond money as a liability. We did not treat it as revenue when I was doing it, and I was having a really hard time with the difference. And but I'm not here to discuss that. I just wanted to know what happened with the $5 million. You answered the question.
And a lot of it depends, Jim, whether it's an enterprise fund or not, and we're a governmental fund, so the accounting's a little bit different, and we don't record the bonds as liabilities on our books. We have I don't want to get into a whole bunch of detail, but we have a separate account group that shows all the debt.
Yeah, okay. That was one issue. The other issue, this is terminology. On that slide there, the one I actually said something about, you're referring to the budget as balanced. In my frame of reference, if you're using money out of the reserves, it's not balanced. That's a deficit. And I'm just using I'm using terminology that in effect doesn't agree with yours. I believe the budget as it exists today is a deficit budget, not a balanced budget. That's the term I would use. And I don't think and the reason why I think that's somewhat important is because I did watch on YouTube today, not last night. Your meetings are too late for me. I watched the city council's comments after you made your presentation, and they picked up a perception that everything's just fine. There's no problem. Let's hire more police. I mean, I heard several people talk, 3 different people, I think, said that. And it's not true. It's not just fine. When we are having deficit spending, things aren't fine. And the only reason you have adequate reserves right now is because you sold bonds. And that's not good. You know, borrowing money to pay operating expenses is not a good thing. So I think the council picked up. Now maybe, you know, there's this need to paint everything rosy, but not if it leads to bad decisions. Like hiring people that we really can't afford, hiring more people that we really can't. I'm not saying we shouldn't hire any people, but we shouldn't hire more people that we really can't afford. That's the gist of what I'm trying to say. And I was disturbed by their conclusion of the presentation. You know, maybe I was just listening a little differently than they were to what you said, because I didn't pick it up as rosy as they seem to think it was. But I was disturbed about that part. And the other part that I just wanted to ask about was, as you know, the Finance and Audit Committee, while it still had the budget as a duty, did make a recommendation to make certain changes in the fire department staffing. They formally passed a motion to do so, make a recommendation to the city council. You don't think they did that?
I don't recall that, no. I recall the first thing that you said was, I'm not going to recommend any layoffs.
That is what I said. But I also recommended that there be reductions in the fire department. This was in what they voted on. You know, it was a written out email, so there wasn't any doubt about what was said, that there would be reductions in the fire department based on attrition. That's what it was said in the email. And they voted to approve that. And I discussed that. I'm not sure. It seems to have gotten lost. That's why I'm talking about it. And I'm concerned about that, because it's true. There's a difference between layoffs and attrition, absolutely. But the end result would be the same over time. So that's it.
If I could speak to that just briefly. I think the city has come a long way in a year. And what we said last night is still true tonight, which is I believe the city has turned a corner, but it's not out of the woods. So I think the price of a balanced budget going forward is going to be some, diligence, some vigilance about budgeting what we mean and kind of meaning what we say. One of the attachments to the budget report this cycle was a fire services study, and that report, which is not the subject of this town hall meeting tonight, identifies from about 30,000 feet some of the options that the city has. As regarding the public safety departments, they consume most of the city's revenue to perform essential services. We've budgeted this year, I believe, $1.6 million for fire department overtime. If that amount were to double again, this picture would be much different and much worse. And so I think the city will continue to have to make some hard choices about whether it does or does not keep to the adopted budget that will take effect July 1st. We're going to have to really watch it. Last year we had the global pandemic. Our fire calls for service, our overtime went through the roof. I don't know that the city had a lot of choice about that because we were saving lives. But I would encourage you to read that Fire Services study report,
No, I read it.
and we can have more conversation about that in the
No,
future.
Perhaps I didn't communicate this effectively. What I was trying to say was that the Finance and Audit Committee meeting, this group did make a recommendation. This was the only real budget recommendation they made when you looked at the whole sum and substance of the meeting, to do some changes in the fire department. And it was just a recommendation, that's all it was. And I would have thought that that in our processes in the city, that would have been, at least in some form or another, communicated to the city council. That's my point. And there was some language in the staff report that talked a little bit about possibilities in the fire department. So it wasn't like it wasn't there at all, but it wasn't in the presentation that she made, and not in the the PowerPoint. It was in the words in the big book, and how many people read all those words? And I do. I'm probably the only guy in the world that reads the budget. Anyway, and my point is, you have citizens that spent time doing something, and I know that was a rough meeting. I'm not arguing that point at all. I'm just talking about they actually did do something, and it got lost. So it's kind of a complaint. The last thing I wanted to talk about is kind of maybe considered a quibble, but I'm going to say it anyway. Everything I've been reading about property is that property values are rising rapidly, mainly due to two factors. One factor is the impetus for inflation generated by the federal government printing, what was it, $1.7 trillion. That's inflation. So that's the reason for property values to rise rapidly. And the other reason is that because of the pandemic, people reevaluated their living situation and decided that they no longer wanted to be in small apartments. They wanted to be in homes that had a little space. And as a result, the value of houses has been going up rather rapidly. The last reports from Zillow and all those other, I actually keep track of this stuff. My son's involved in real estate, so it's different area, but I keep track of it. That the year-to-years now are over 4 to 5% on property value, and they're probably going to go higher according to the stuff I've been reading. So my suggestion is, in terms of budget, and this is one item, but it's an important one, because if you change the property tax revenue from essentially $100,000 increase to $1 million, which I think it easily would be, that solves a fair amount of your structural deficit. So that's essentially it in terms of what I had to say.
And we'll look at the property tax during our quarterly reviews. And of course, we don't get it, property tax in until the big one is in January, so you guys won't even see it till the third quarter. And we adjusted it, I believe we adjusted it this year, and we'll adjust it again next year. And that's part of what I said. I don't think we're probably going to use all of that $2.3 million out of reserves, because I think as the economy comes back, as people are vaccinated more and we get more back to normal living, that the economy is going to pick up, and especially with the influx of cash from the federal government.
And Jim, if I could provide one further answer from my perspective to your question, or one of your questions, about should the city choose to add more services, more expenditures, I think that the clear choice that the city faces is, would you like for your professional staff to take that out of reserves or out of the operating side of the budget? Because this budget is just a rollover budget. We're not proposing to staff up or service level up yet. I know we've got a lot of unmet needs, and we're going to talk about some of those a little bit later. But I think it's clear choices. I don't think we've backed away from the obvious aspects of that. We're going to have to either get some direction to take it out of reserves or get some direction to take it out of operating.
Well, I think I've already said my point of view on deficit spending. I think I've said it a lot of times, which is I don't think it's appropriate to have deficit spending, period. And the couple of the city council members said it was inappropriate to use bankruptcy. I don't think it is. As long as you're borrowing money to pay for operating expenses, you're actually in bankruptcy. That's one of the definitions of bankruptcy, borrowing money to pay for operating expenses. And so I strongly recommend that you do what you need to do to bring the budget into balance, which means revenues equal expenditures, not using reserves. And I've provided 2 recommendations that are, I think, one of them was just to increase revenue by $1 million. I just said it, in property tax. That covers half your problem, because I think that's safe. I'm talking about 99% confidence. The other is the fire department attrition thing that I talked about. And I know you have to negotiate about the brownouts that I wanted to recommend, so I know that's a problem. But you don't have to negotiate about attrition. There's nothing in the contract that precludes not filling vacancies for regular firefighters. There is a provision that you can't do it for the firefighter paramedics on the ambulance because it specifies 3 ambulances. But there's nothing in the contract that specifies that we have to have 5 engines on duty all the time. So it does say that if you have an engine, you have to staff it with 3 people, but it doesn't say how many you have to have. So I'm repeating some stuff I've already said, but you stated how do I think the city should respond to this particular issue, and I'm giving you my best shot to basically bring the budget into true balance. And I do not agree with what Robin said. Wait until we see what actually happens with property tax in January, I think she said. I think it should be done when the council adopts the budget. The budget should be your best judgment on your financial situation at the time of the budget adoption. You don't have to wait for real, because real is always different than budget. It's just a best judgment thing. And the real problem I have with this budget as it exists is it makes the city adopt a policy of deficit spending, and I think that's just wrong on so many levels. And so that's that. I'm trying to respond to the way you framed the question as best I can, and it's a deep policy thing. I think I spent a lot of my life, 15 years actually, dealing with people who didn't do what I just said, and all the trauma it caused those organizations. And I saw a lot of crying people that got fired because of fiscal mismanagement, and I hate it with a passion, and I'd rather deal with it before. So that's it.
Thank you very much.
I don't want to.
I appreciate your comments and that you're here tonight. Thank you. The next.
Yes, it'll be Ms. Potras.
Right. No, it's fine. Not a problem.
Well, if I could answer that question, but let's honor her time at the microphone, and we'll get in a dialogue with you after her.
2 questions. As a resident I am really tired and frustrated, and maybe you're going to talk about it later, okay? The fire department overtime. A budget starts off with so much money, and you, I think, mentioned how much they had. Are we going to, down the road, see another report saying they overdrafted, they deficit spend? Are you putting controls in? It's a management leadership issue when they deficit spend. Please don't tell me the pandemic. That was something. But when one department does this year after year after year, and they swore to us that if they were fully staffed, the overtime deficit would stop, and it didn't. Credibility is zilch on this. So, are you doing management things to keep them within the budget that they've started? Second part is when you came here, your first night, you were standing here, and I really like something you said, and you were going to bring in interest, I'm getting old and COVID brain, interest-based bargaining. We did that where I worked. It has to come here, I think, if we're going to really start dealing with issues. It took a few years to get it going. We had a union that was as hard-nosed as our firefighters union. But it brings the groups together with management, and they started dealing with problems, and we employees benefited. I know he was involved with it at the start, okay, of it. I plead with you to please do that, seriously. We residents deserve better than this nickel and diming us, which is what it is. The fire department does a good job. They have a difficult job. I get all of that. But they can't go for another year with excuses. Just not right. So please bring in the interest base, and it'll take you a few years to get it off the ground. I know it will. But in the long run, it will make a good difference to West Covina residents, as well as the employees. We would go 5 years without a raise, 3 years without a raise. Interest-based bargaining came in. We started getting raises. Isn't that what the employees want? You don't want the conflict with management. You want to get that trust going. And I'm expecting you to do that, sir. Thank you.
All right. Mr. Drew, would you like to speak?
More comfortable in hearing the presentation before I chime in. That was why I posed the question as to whether the opportunity to participate
JD, if I could interrupt, we're streaming this meeting, and so we wanted to have the conversation on the microphone. So can we just hand it to you? Do you mind? We could just... Microphone will walk to you if you don't want to walk to it.
Don't ask me to repeat what I just said because I don't think I'll be able to do it.
I got it. Thank you.
I'm a complete layman to this process. I'm here more to learn than to contribute. But as you've said in the past, I think this definition of deficit spending is a definition without a difference. At the end, you're going to be spending more than what you have in the reserves. You say that it's partly due to the pandemic, but I do know that pre-pandemic we were doing deficit spending, and I think you were sort of on board pre-pandemic. So you certainly weren't the greatest part of it, involved in the greatest part of it, but you were here. And if this is just a rollover of the budget, as you said, then I'm not sure how we're making that current. How are we turning that corner if we're just rolling over previous budget? Now, like I said, admittedly, I'm probably talking in a forum that's 10 grades beyond me, but these are just my observation that we're mentioning priorities, but we're really not identifying any priorities. I would imagine that council has already discussed this with staff and may have a list. I know the residents were surveyed in prior budgetary years as to what their priorities, what they thought would be the priorities, and that kind of seems, or at least the majority of a particular priority seems to have fallen between the cracks. I recall police was certainly one. The fire department's use of overtime, many of the unfortunate suffering the city is going through. So I came here tonight hoping that I would not just watch a presentation, but that you would share how you plan on spending some of this $20 million in terms of its use in the general fund, with regards to the general fund, and how it's going to be utilized in relationship to the obvious 800-pound gorilla, the health department, right? So I know those are great generalities on my part, because like I said, I'm no expert in budgeting, but I think there are concerns that I and other residents have that if you can address in a layman's way, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll invite Robin to respond as well. But our intention tonight was to do this in pieces. First piece was Robin's presentation about the overall budget for the coming fiscal year, review of the big picture budget, drill down to the general fund, talk about the operating departments, talk about where we end up fiscal year end with the reserves. And then the next portion, after we finish with this portion, we have a new assistant finance director. I'll introduce her to you tonight. This is Stephanie Sekema. She's very experienced and has some broad and deep municipal experience and has been a real blessing to our finance department and to our city to get the finance department where we all want it to be. So her presentation tonight is going to be really a first look at what might be eligible under the federal stimulus bill. It's a big, broad bill that does all the usual things that federal stimulus bills do. Food for hungry people, jobs for unemployed people. Significantly this time, which is really unique, it provides monies to instrumentalities of the states, the local governments. We're going to get some $19 million. And so Stephanie is going to give a brief overview and look at that, which is the first time that's been out publicly. So you're going to get a real-time look. We've got one other participant tonight. Mr. Bennett, would you like to ask any questions about the general budget before we move to the next portion?
Actually,
Oh, excuse me. I'm not going to slight Marcia. Welcome.
I'm always willing to let a lady go first. So.
There you go.
I missed the first part of this. I came in kind of a few minutes late, so I apologize. If we're talking just general fund budget, I don't know that I have a lot of questions right now. I'm definitely going to review some of this when I get time. But
Steve, not to interrupt you, but I'm offering, if you guys want to hear it again, we'll do it again. We're here tonight to talk budget.
I'm not here to waste anybody's time.
I don't consider this a waste of our time. This is important to me.
Appreciate that. But like I said, it's up to the people in the room. But I know I came in late. I know Marcia came in late. I watched her pull in as well. But that's fine. If everyone wants to, I don't care. I just know for me, I'm looking forward to seeing the other stuff. I can tell you right now, my concerns overall are we're going to be spending a lot of money to do a health department. I know everyone keeps saying it's not, but that's false. Even if you're giving 90% of the permit fees to TransTech, you're still spending money. You're still losing other monies in there. So that's a huge, as somebody said, 800-pound elephant in the room. My other concern, somebody mentioned fire department overtime. I support my public safety, both sides, but I will tell you right now that their continued disregard for a departmental budget and disregard for overtime is extremely telling to residents. And it, to me, is one of the major problems in the city is who is actually I guess you could say, who's steering the car? Because it doesn't seem like the staff is, and it doesn't seem like the residents are, and actually it doesn't seem like the council is. So, you've got a fire department that's controlling their own future, and as we've seen, they don't do a good job. So those are two of the really big topics. Police seems to be managing their budget, so I respect them for that. There's a number of things. I've noticed we've had a number of staff hires. Those concern me as well. We've had people changing positions. So there's a number of things in there that I'm really curious about. But those are probably my biggest questions. And if they're going to be answered later on, I don't know that any need to go back. I'll let Marcia kind of comment as well. But those are big things for me. And the lack of transparency. Even in previous budget meetings, I've watched these online, and this may be only of a couple I've attended, but even in previous years of budgets, under you and before you, Mr. CM, so there's a lack of transparency, and this council has proven time and time again that there's a lack of transparency from them. So forgive me as a resident, but I have very little trust in our finance department. Contrary to you, ma'am, I know you're new, but I have very little trust in our finance department. I've watched her up here countless times give reports on stuff. I watched her during the MOUs for the police and fire tell us that overtime wasn't calculated and all kinds of other stuff. So I have very little trust in that sector as we speak. And so, like I said, that's a problem for me. And the fact that our council's not asking those questions publicly, that's a huge problem. And I'm waiting to see what the budget is. So before I keep ranting, I'll kind of stop from there because I'm sure you'll hear from me again. So here you go, Sean.
Thanks. Ms. Solorio?
If I may, I really didn't get an answer to my questions. I know you kind of tossed it over to Robin, but I don't think I heard Robin answer my questions. Maybe I just wasn't clear enough. If you're not wanting to answer my question, that's fine. I just wanted to state the fact that I didn't think I received an answer. My question was really, how is this rollover budget any different from previous years? And I'm talking about pre-COVID deficit spending. How is this one going to be any different? You're selling this new budget as one that's taking the cities, taking the curve for the city, but I don't see it. And you're kind of splitting it by saying, redefining deficit spending. So how is that possible? What's the change? Because the previous assistant manager, and yourself, Ms. Robin, had a discussion with Mr. Wu, I believe back in February, where Mr. Wu thought the revenues were down. The assistant manager shared that no, the revenues actually had been gone up, or that the reserves were gone up and the revenue went down. I believe that was your position, your clarification to Mr. Wu. He had it the reverse, whichever way it went. And so I'm not sure where we stand today in terms of difference in previous budgets to this proposed budget.
In the last few years, the budgets have been balanced. If you look at the comprehensive annual financial report, you cannot dispute what I have said. The reserves have gone up. We went from 9.8 million to 12 million. This year we expect to go up again. You can't dispute those numbers when they've had audited financial statements. I think we're going to part ways philosophically, because I will never balance a budget by increasing the revenues. It's like budgeting 101. You don't do that. And if I don't believe, and you're saying it's our best picture, but that's your picture, not mine, Jim. If I don't believe we're going to have $1 million extra in property tax, I'm not going to budget for it because Jim Grivich tells me to. I'm sorry. That's my philosophy. I've been doing budgets for 30 years, and it hasn't steered me wrong yet. I would rather have the revenues come in higher than I budgeted and report back to the council that we didn't have to use those reserves, and we've increased the reserves again. As far as the rollover budget goes, I did reduce the revenues based on what we know from this year and previous years, And some of these revenues are not going to come back. They're eliminated permanently. For example, the false alarms. We could start that program up again. We haven't done so yet, so it's not in the budget. The contractor's license fees are not coming back. We don't collect those anymore. So that's $300,000 of lost revenue, and there's other examples. On the expenditure side, when I said it was a rollover budget, we rolled over the numbers that were previously there. However, we did analysis for things like, we know certain things for our maintenance, our janitorial is going up. All the costs are going up. It doesn't make sense to just roll over the budget with the same numbers if you know for a fact that you're going to spend more than that. I think that would be not a crime, but it wouldn't be transparent. So I don't know if I've answered your questions. It seemed to. So I don't remember when you came into the presentation, but in the very beginning I said the health department is not in this budget document. The Big League Dreams or West Covina Sportplex is not in this budget. Until we get further direction from the council on how those things are going to go and staff develops a budget for those, we'll bring it back to the council at that time.
Would it be fair to say that those are potential budget amendments or down the ways? Because they're obviously a sitting expense for the city. Certainly the health department, from what I've read, there's already been $100,000 spent on the looking into establishing the health department, and certainly Fields of Dreams is something that's going to have to be wrestled with. So, you know, you're going to create a budget. Your position is that it's balanced, but it seems to me that in just forecasting, you're going to see changes to this budget, which has been kind of the traditional way of doing business and is what's brought us to where we are now with financial crisis.
Except for this year, whenever I made a budget amendment to the general fund, there was a corresponding offset to keep that budget in balance. And it was very, you know, I did this very calculatingly and made sure that this budget is going to stay in balance so that we don't deficit spend.
All right. I think we're going to move now and invite our new Assistant Finance Director, Stephanie Sikkema, to give a brief overview about where we are with the federal stimulus package monies that the city will be participating with. Stephanie, welcome.
Thank you. Okay, so this will be a brief overview, but I will touch on where we are looking at spending that $20 million as of right now. So the American Recovery Act included about $350 billion that's going to state and local entities. The city of West Covina is going to get about $19.5 million of that. The recovery funds are intended to support public health expenses, address negative economic impacts, replace public sector revenue that was lost, provide premium pay for essential workers, and invest in water, sewer, and broadband infrastructures. And those sound like big buckets right now, but the Treasury did send out a 150-page document which really details what they mean when they say support health expenditures. And so in going through those, it is not as open and broad as it sounds in terms of recovery. And so when we looked into those, staff proposed utilizing the funds in 3 of the buckets that we have for eligible uses. I'll start with the first, is we look at utilizing about $9 million to support public health expenses related to COVID-19 or health emergencies. One of those being as simple as EKG monitors, which are necessary in response, fire communication and equipment, making repairs to our vaccine point of distribution and response facilities. And then there is the health department services contract that council approved that we would include in that $9 million for public health related. The next category we're looking at spending money in is $1 million to address negative economic impacts to the public, and this would be used in partnership with community-based organizations to do job training and creation. So we're looking at setting aside $1 million to do that, reinvest in our community. And then the last bucket that we're looking at spending a lot of the money is in recouping our lost revenue. And when we recoup lost revenue, the federal government is making us identify exactly what we would use those on. So it can't just go back into fund balance and into our reserves. That's actually one of the stated ineligible uses for the reimbursement of the lost revenue. And so this is a preliminary listing of where staff would like to propose using the funding, starting with microwave system infrastructure for city buildings, a new financial accounting software so we can be more transparent and efficient, park sports field lighting, an ADA transition plan, park pathway lighting, removal of a communication tower, and then public safety equipment, including 2 fire trucks, a ladder truck, and self-contained breathing apparatuses. So with all of that, we're looking at spending about $9.5 million. Of course, these are estimates because these are estimates on the amount of revenue lost, and that's based on calculations that the Treasury specifically designs for us. And so we will have until the end of 2024 to state our obligations for these funds, so we still have a lot of time to lay out the plan and determine exactly how we'll be using it, and then we have till 2026 to spend all the funding. So that concludes the overview of what we intend to spend the $19.5 million on.
We would welcome questions, comments from those that are here about this program. Stephanie has participated in several different training sessions, National League of Cities, International City Management Association, et cetera. And it's incumbent upon the city to come up with a plan to address how these monies will be utilized in accordance with those federal guidelines. So, Jerry, you want to go first?
Actually, if we can we start with Ms. Solario?
Oh, I'm sorry. Marcia. I meant Marcia.
I was hoping to hide, but I guess not. First of all, hello to everybody. It's my first time here in over a year. My goodness. It's nice to see everyone's faces again. Just a quick question. One of the slides, what is a microwave system? Was it microwave something? Yeah. What's
the microwave system infrastructure for city buildings? I believe that's an IT infrastructure component. So I don't know the specifics of that particular project, but it was one that was brought forth as the listings of when we reached out to other department heads.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. You've got, unlike other cities, virtually, from what I understand, no input from the residents. So I'm going to just accept what you've presented that way. So I'm going to ask a couple of questions. Park pathway lighting. What park pathway lighting? Is it all parks? Is it specific parks? Like Palmview Park going to get some pathways lighting? Or is it the bigger parks? Or is it replacing existing lighting in all of the parks for more energy efficiency?
This is energy efficiency to replace the lighting in all of the parks to transition from the old technology to the LEDs.
Okay. And then park sports field lighting. Is that sports fields in existing parks?
Yes.
Or is it the sportsplex?
It's all of the sports fields in all of the existing parks.
And they'll have timers to turn them off automatically.
Actually,
so
the new
somebody doesn't have to
technology,
do that.
Jerry, is pretty sophisticated. Used to be the sports teams had to check out a key,
Right.
and then they duplicated the key, and then you lost control.
Right.
New Musco systems are actually on your iPad, and they account for the time of day and the setting of the sun and I don't know what all, the new moon, and have to account to the minute for the energy use at those. But these new systems are far more efficient than the old.
And-
Our systems are now so old. And I guess that
I know,
applies to everything on this list.
I understand that. I worked in the public sector. The public sector does not have the money to keep everything up to speed. So constantly telling us that it's old, that gets old. Please stop that. We know it's old. I worked in a college with leaky roofs. Okay, I get it. Yeah,
We have lots of buckets here.
but just to keep telling us, we know that.
Okay.
It gets so old, and employees keep telling me it. I mean, we get it. But guess what? I don't change my car every year either. Some things we just individually look at. Can
Can I share a real life example? Came up this week. You know, we sold this property to Eminent Health and took out some light fixtures there. The crews scavenged the old light fixtures because they needed them to replace light fixtures they couldn't get at some of the other places where they burned out.
Exactly.
I'll try not to use the word old, Jerry.
Thank you.
Yeah,
And we
it's-
used to do the same thing. I used to get on the IT guys that we didn't have to keep everything,
Yeah.
okay? But we might need it down the road. So, okay, the other thing is you're familiar with it, I'm not, the communication tower. Where's that at?
The city used to have an operating communication tower. I think it's on Vincent. And the city no longer had need of it, but the city continues to pay rent on it. This is the cost to remove it so that the rent payment can go away.
I've dealt with that in my life too. That's a good thing to take it out, okay?
But I won't use the word that it's old.
Okay, so we're going to bounce around on slides a bit, so I apologize to you. And by the way, welcome. So can we go back one? I'm trying to see where my questions were. Okay, so in here, the PSA for Health Department services, that's the cost that we're paying TransTech to do Health Department, or is this for public service announcements?
That's the professional services agreement
Thank you.
that was approved with TransTech.
Right, so this is the TransTech contract, basically, and then they're going to get, if I remember correctly, 90% of the permits?
This is the startup cost going forward. So when you get state approval for a health department, the arrangement would be 90% of the fees collected.
Can you tell us what TransTech gets currently for permits for building and safety?
We're at 50-50.
Interesting. I'm fine with EKGs. I'm assuming that's for equipment, correct?
Yes,
To carry on the fire trucks or paramedics?
one in every fire station.
Okay. The communication equipment I kind of okay with. It says vaccine pods. Is that to replace expenses that we've already spent, or is that to do something different, and maybe I'm misunderstanding it?
Well, response facilities is fire stations. And what we're trying to do is won't use the word old, we're trying to get ahead of regulatory compliance and OSHA violations and give quarters that are to standard. For example, we just got a facility condition report for Fire Station 1. I don't know if everybody's seen that, but without saying it in so many words, it's time to take that building down. So we're going to need to, it's a community, address how do the people assigned to Fire Station 1, how are they quartered, and where do we house the equipment? We're out shopping for bids now for interim, temporary crew quarters, trailers, and we're getting bids for doors for the old shop building because that building is at the end of its useful life and needs to come down.
Okay, so the 5.3 million or 5.4, depending how you look at it, that's basically then more of a remodel fire stations cost is what you're looking at?
It's a placeholder number to do repairs that we know need to be done. It doesn't define which stations and which repairs. We're underway now with about $1.6 million worth of critical repairs at a couple of our firehouses, but the need is far greater.
And we don't necessarily disagree with the need. I was just trying to understand the dollars. So is the plan that at this point, and I know this is preliminary, but is the plan to tear down Station 1 and completely rebuild it based on your comments?
I think we have to do that. The report, the most recent report, in effect, said that the city should hire a structural engineer to confirm. Frankly, I don't need to hire another consultant to confirm what we all know. I think the building is done. There's enough problems and structural and mechanical and exiting and mold and electrical and, name one, that it'd be more efficient to build new.
Okay. Can you go to the next one for me, ma'am? So this says job training creation partnership for $1 million, delivery assistance to workers and families and such. And so I'm kind of understanding this, I think. I just kind of want to get a little bit of clarity. Job training and creation would be for who? Would it be for the businesses or would it be for actual residents training?
Well, this isn't defined, but one of the ideas that's been discussed, and we need to discuss it further and figure it out, is some communities in San Gabriel Valley have hired, for example, the Conservation Corps kids. They get job training, they get skill development, and the city gets medians. That would be a win-win for us. If we could come up with something as have the other cities nearby of La Puente and Montebello, Monterey Park, Temple Boulevard and Temple City. They've used the California Conservation Corps, contracted with them for community benefit projects. The kids get job training and the city gets a project. We haven't done anything more than have just some initial conversation about that. But we think this syncs up with the federal goal.
Okay, so it's kind of a work in progress, but the actual goal here is probably to use some of that money then to trade for work in theory. Is that kind of the idea? That's a common layman's term, right?
Trade it for what?
Trade it for work. Basically, we're going to pay people for training, but they're going to, in essence, get us, like you said, medians.
That's exactly what I mean.
Okay,
Yeah.
So it's basically kind of a trade for work. Okay, ma'am, if you don't mind. Thank you, by the way. So in here, if I understand the American Recovery Act, it's kind of for COVID expenses. And so I'm noticing we're buying 3 fire trucks, 2 trucks, or 1 ladder truck and 2 pumpers. I'm having I'm not saying we don't need them, so understand that I'm completely in agreement that we need that stuff. So please understand that. But do these fall under COVID replacements?
So this particular category is actually not under the COVID-related section. This is under the replacing of our lost revenue. And so when we calculate the lost revenue, we actually come to a number that may be potentially higher than that 9.5 over the next 3 years that they're allowing us to make that calculation. And with that, they make you identify what you're going to spend it on. And the definition of that is to provide government services. And that can include, but is not limited to, maintenance or pay-go funded buildings or infrastructure, including roads, modernization of cybersecurity, hardware, software, protection of critical infrastructure, health services, environmental, police, fire, and other safety services. So it goes into allowing you to basically do it for any governmental service under the umbrella of the reimbursement of your revenue replacement.
Okay, so when we talk revenue replacement, I would assume that means that because of lower property taxes or lower sales taxes or things like that, which is basically city revenue, that's what we're basically getting this for, is replacement, which allows us to kind of spend it within the guidelines that way. Is that a good assessment?
Correct. And it's citywide, and according to the Treasury's definition, so it's all governmental funds that it's basing that calculation on. And then there's a specific formula that the Treasury makes you use, which actually comes out a little higher than what we were originally estimating when we were looking at specific revenue sources.
Is there anything specific that cannot have that funds used for? What are some of those examples?
We cannot use it for pension payments or for financial reserves. We can't put it back into our financial reserves.
So even though it's a general fund replenishment, in theory, we still have to basically spend it according to the thing?
Correct. I believe the goal is that they want you to spend it to boost the economy.
Yeah, so it's kind of restricted, is what Jim just said. Okay.
Can I pause? And I'd like to ask Sean Granger to explain. Somebody asked a question about the microwave system infrastructure, and he's
What
here.
a great idea. I was going to ask the same question.
Here we go. Okay.
Okay, so yeah, it's not to cook food. That's probably the first question everyone asks. It's not. So basically, when you have an enterprise like a city, you're gonna have a lot of cities have fiber rings. The city that I came from, Pasadena, we built a ring of fiber around the city, right? If you don't have that, then you're paying the company for fiber. So an alternative is what West Covina did years ago, which is called their microwaves. So they're giant dishes around the city, and it connects all the fire stations, the police station. It kind of runs a ring around the entire city. All city utilities use it. Now, if we had our own fiber ring, that's a pretty good, but it's more expensive than $1 million to run a ring around the city. It's very costly because you have to trench. So, but if you're paying monthly, after 5 years, you're going to pay more than $1 million to Spectrum. The microwave systems, the one we have now, is about 17 years old. So the reason we want to replace it is that in the lifespan, we will save a lot of money by having our own system. We're not paying a monthly fee because each fiber connection to each site to get the traffic that we need is pretty expensive. So that's what we need to replace. Our fiber, just kind of our microwave, sorry. Our microwaves, just give you an idea of kind of the situation we're in. The one we bought had a 10-year life cycle. We're, like I said, about 17 years. The company went out of business. It got bought. That company went out of business. And there literally is no one that we can call anymore to fix it, except for, if some of you probably remember Tom, who's here for about 30 years. He's the only person in California that knows, and he worked here for 30 years. So we call him, he's retired, but we bring him back just because there's no more parts that we can get. So we have to have Tom come and, tinker with it and solder it and make this thing work. Yeah. Well, Tom's young. He started young, so he's good. But that's the situation. So $1 million, I know it sounds like a lot, but actually it connects everything in the city. And in the long run, for us, it's it's a good.
Hey, Sean, would you agree that that's basically interconnecting the networks of all the different city buildings? Is that basically just...
Yeah, basically. Yeah, it's so... But also the phones, it's... Yes, it's a network. Oh.
Microwaves or whatever kind of waves,
Right.
carcinogenic type of.
Yeah, well, microwaves, you've been living them for, at least
Microwave
17
world, right.
But the way they work is they're point to point, they're directly at each other, so it's pretty. They don't really go out. So, and they're very high. We're up on towers. One of the other issues we have is the communication tower. So we have a communication tower that we pay monthly for, but we don't. It no longer is in use. Yeah. So that's what we're dealing with.
Well, I would characterize all of these as things that the city knows it needs. We've stared. No, I'm not going to say it because Jerry told me not to. We've stared in the face this question of substandard equipment, collapse of government. Can't run your 911 calls in a vehicle that doesn't get you to the scene. There you go.
I wanted to ask, speaking of the 911 calls, is the communications equipment for fire and police my favorite subject, a tiered response system? It's 3.7 million on that other chart.
3.3.
3.3. Tiered response. I saw a very sophisticated version in the city of Los Angeles, and I was hoping that we might be moving in that direction.
It's state-of-the-art Motorola radios. As to whether the tiered response is in the city's short-term future, I would be pleased but surprised.
Okay, because it involves software and computers, and to do it properly.
Software, computers, training, personnel. There's a lot of aspects.
Yeah, I know. That's why because that's about the right amount of money. So either that or we have to contract it with somebody that already has it. But as he said earlier, it's easier if you have it yourself. That way you don't have to pay forever on a contract. When you're doing fiber, paying somebody else for fiber, you pay them forever. And it's a profit center for the company that you're paying to, because all they have to do is install, and after that it's all profit. And that's what would happen if we contracted with somebody else for tiered response. If we had our own, we had the $3 million or so that it would cost to install it, it would be much more cost effective over the long run for us than contracting. That's my question on that particular item. The other item was that I wanted to ask a question about was ladder truck. I hope that isn't replacing the old ladder truck that was retired. I hope. I don't know if you're aware of that enormous controversy that took place. Engine 4. It was the famous Engine 4.
Well, there's pumper engines and there's ladder trucks. The ladder truck is the long one. That's the toolbox the fire department uses to get anywhere that has the Tillerman. They're actually thinking Quint.
Quint.
Correct.
Excellent. Not a problem. The big difference is the ladder truck. The label is a problem. Ladder truck has no pumper engine.
I understand.
And Quint does. So if it were labeled Quint, I think it would be a lot less controversial.
Slide's getting better by the minute.
That's it.
Okay.
That was all. That was my only questions. I'd like to just make a general statement on the communications and the IT stuff.
Yeah.
As a resident, I actually would like to see that stuff upgraded and training and the staffing for both the dispatch, all of that. His department, I think the city would actually benefit as residents. I think you'd work smarter and using the cliche instead of harder. There'd be that would be an area that I would like to see if I had input into where money could go. It would be in the communications infrastructure, IT areas, because I think that is what we could build off in the future.
Okay. Philosophically, I'm opposed to this federal entitlement, but pragmatically, I don't want to send back the stimulus money, right? We want it. But my question to the subject matter expert, Stephanie, is this seems public, a little bit lopsided and heavy on the public side, right? And I'm wondering, can this money be used to assist the private sector in ways that, for those that didn't qualify for the loans or the relief monies, are there restrictions to that end? Because it seems like this is mostly regarding the city's needs, not the private sector's needs. And when I'm referring to the private sector, I'm referring to the small business, which was partly the justification given for the health department. the impact that they had to suffer. So why isn't this relief money being targeted to those entities, right? My other question is, how did the city actually come up with this list, this identified list of needs? When was it put together, and was this already approved by city council? Okay, so this is coming out from staff. It hasn't gone before council. I'm wondering, in the past, as I mentioned earlier, the residents were polled for previous budget priorities. This seems to probably fall under that category, and I don't recall us being reached out to. So,
JD, one of the things we said as part of the introduction tonight was this would really be the community's first look at this. We've got a lot of time on our hands now. The money's going to get wild in any day now, but the city's not required to spend this money immediately. If I could respond to one of the points you made, if we've learned a number of lessons through this pandemic, and one of them is this is a really great time to be a full-service city, because the idea that somebody else is going to come in here and provide services to our residents is a myth, an ancient myth. And we tried to stay focused on our bread and butter, on our core services, on our essential services, services that we as a government have to provide to our residents that if we don't provide, nobody else will. None of the surrounding jurisdictions are resource-rich and are going to be able to come in and pick up what we can't do. So that's what's behind this. We've got unmet needs here that are myriad, and this is only a partial list of things that we think is essential for us to continue to do what we need to do as a government to keep our residents safe.
Totally agree. And the list could certainly be grown. But my question still remains, and that is, why are we not channeling some of these funds to the private sector? Are we restricted in doing so? I guess is my question. Jennifer, or excuse me, Stephanie?
So there is a component that allows you to address economic impact, which includes small businesses and the impacted industries such as tourism, hotels, and things like that. We have not identified any programs for that yet, but that doesn't mean that the city couldn't expand on that and include it in the future after we get input from all the other community organizations.
And I'm raising that point because there's only 4 of us here tonight representing, well, I'm sorry, there you go again, out there in the outskirts. 5, 6, I'll give them 10, and I would still say that doesn't represent the city by any means, and certainly doesn't represent the business part of the city, which I know during, in recent council meetings, they came in with some large concerns. I think some of this money rightly should be considered for some of this money in terms of their losses, and maybe they weren't able to tap into any federal or state assistance. So this is a work in progress list, is that correct? Okay. So the other concern I have was with the police, because since we've got a list of priorities, fire departments seems to have gotten their, it's a splurge fund to me. This is what I see it as. And basically the fire department's kind of walking away looking pretty good here with a lot of the money. They've seemed to be a major concern for the city, not only in its existence, but in its use of budgeted money, since we're on a budget meeting tonight. So the police doesn't seem to be playing a big role here. And that's a major concern for me as a resident, because we have an ever-increasing problems in the city in terms of crime, homelessness, and a lack of police enforcement. So are there any restrictions for some of this money to be channeled towards the police department? I would imagine not, since the fire department has taken their cut. Thank you.
Second. Do you guys want to respond to that, or?
I hear you about the private sector. I'm your city manager, so I'm here to advocate for my departments. Point made. I would say, as regards our operating departments, you just look at where we are with rolling stock. Last year we got, I think, 18 new police cars, so we got the fleet more or less better. Wouldn't say it's completely current. We still have some vehicles that are, we're not going to use that word, Jerry, not new. But as regards the rolling stock in the fire department, it's not to standard, and it's thin, and it's not a point of pride for this community. We had an ambulance, rescue ambulance that was T-boned, entirely the fault of the other party, and we were scrambling, wondering how to put an old unit, substandard unit, back into service until that one could get fixed or we could litigate the insurance claim, et cetera. We need to do way better to get proper equipment, proper rolling stock for the fire department. The communications equipment on this list is police and fire. $3.3 million worth of communications equipment benefits both. And in terms of the physical,
That's the current existing relationship now, though. That's not not a new.
In terms of the facilities, we've got in the police station plenty of places that need attention. When it rains, the jail cell leaks, but we don't have a facility condition report that says tear it down. So we're trying to do a bit of triage and focus on the worst first to get things contemporaneous, to get things current. So this is, I guess, a best judgment recommendation.
On that same thing, I was going to point out, though, that a lot of the police funds come from asset forfeiture. Fire department doesn't get asset forfeiture. So it's not, but there's still money there. I was just going to throw that out to you. Yeah, I know you can't say that, so just something to think about. And again, I'm not a big proponent of asset forfeiture to begin with, but just stating what currently, again, we'll go back to ideology versus pragmatic. One of the last slides that I'm going to finish up, I know Jim has a comment. Can we go back to the slides, the numbers? I think last one I didn't get to, and I'll try to finish up. So, Jim, is that the last one, or is there one more?
That's the last one.
Oh, well, maybe I did reach the last one. Okay, so one of the things that we've talked about, what's the total of the American Recovery Act that we have, quote unquote, allocated at this point?
It is $19,566,000.
And so we have kind of allocations based on all those slides. I didn't do a quick math.
Yes, so all of these add up to that. And for full disclosure, when we talked about the fire department, or the vaccine point of distributions, as we're calling them, that 5.3 is actually the balance of what we had identified specific needs for, and then the balance of that, because we could spend more money on those facilities in themselves, is how we got to the 5.3 million to utilize all of the 19 million that we'll be getting.
Okay, and to JD's point on the public sector, is there anything in this, or is there any limit, I should say, based on either a dollar figure or percentage that allows us to spend on public sector? Is there certain guidelines on that?
Are you when you say public sector?
I'm sorry, private sector.
Oh, private sector.
To like small businesses, for instance, in the city that may have suffered. You mentioned hospitality, restaurants, hotels, whatever that may be. Is there any set guide or limitations that they've put on this that you can only spend so much or not spend so much on?
They don't put monetary stipulations in regards to your full allocation, but there are programmatic limitations as to how you can implement programs for small businesses and tourism and things like that. But there's not a dollar threshold. You could up to your 19 million.
Would it be safe to say it's probably more percentage based on, because I'm sure different cities get different amounts, would that calculation kind of be what they determine a percentage of?
No, so they didn't limit you in any of the categories. The only one that we're kind of limited to would be our calculation component of our revenue loss.
Okay, so going back to the public health department, so we have the $100,000, just shy of $100,000 for the public health department creation, but there's no other money in here right now for the public health department. Okay. And so this portion of the presentation is just about the American Recovery Act, right, or whatever we're calling it. Okay. So are we going to? Is there another part of this after this?
There's no part 3.
So this is going to wrap up the whole thing for today, other than public comment?
A lot of work went into this, but we're happy to talk about any other aspects of municipal finance that you're interested in.
Okay, so real quick on that then, you mentioned that this is basically our first date that we're going to talk about the budget. Can you give us an idea of when our next date is and how long we're going to be dating before we decide to get married?
We're intending to adopt the budget at the second meeting in June.
So you're looking at 3.5 weeks?
All the days between now and June 15th would be available. If there's interest in another meeting like this or not like this between now and then, we're completely open to that.
Well, I mean, I think there's a 100% unanimous vote in this room, but, we're only 5 people.
I'm actually heartened that you came. I appreciate that you came.
I did it. I did it because I knew you missed me.
It's true. It's true, Steve.
I would have came last night, but I knew you had all kinds of house guests, and I didn't want to be the last one to leave. So the thing that I'm concerned about is the timeline that you're dealing with does not leave much room for things that we've normally done in the city. And people mentioned the survey where we put it on, and it could be on the website and linked to a survey. And you can use SurveyMonkey, whatever you want to use. But I do think that one of the issues that this city has, and I'll just pull the lid off the thing. This council doesn't listen to anybody. And so even though I want you to do a survey, and I do want you to, and I think the residents do, I'm under no perception that this council is actually going to take that survey and act on it, because they don't really listen to us now. They listen to who they want to listen to, which is kind of the way, and that's my opinion. I understand it's my personal opinion. I'm not speaking for anyone else. That's me. But in watching the public health department and watching what would have been the LA County fire scenario and all the different things that happened in the last year to 2 years, there's no perception that the council is really open to public input. And again, here we have another situation where the budget meeting, while it's being made today, I got the email announcing this meeting yesterday. And there are residents that noticed that. It's very noticeable that there wasn't a lot of emailing out or information about it, and judging the fact that there are 5 residents here, and for the most part, the 5 of us that are here are gadflies. We come to all the meetings, or many of the meetings, and we're heavily involved. But the true populace of the city, the people that matter, the residents in the city that matter, I'd be willing to bet 95 to, probably 99.9% of them had no idea this was going on. Some of them don't care. I get it. I've been involved in politics for a while. But I don't think that there's enough of an outreach for this city. As a city who is the 9th worst financial city in the state, and who has a problem not doing deficit spending, that has a problem with massive overdrafts from our fire department's overtime, and with all the things going on, and lack of faith in our city council, I think that one of the things I would highly recommend is we have another meeting, and I think we publicize it a lot more. I think we do a survey, and I'm just giving you PR techniques here, because to be honest with you, that's what needs to happen. We have residents who know we're in financial trouble, but they don't know what's going on. They don't even know about this meeting to be able to input. And I think we've got a lot of talented people in this city. Jim Grivich has had a lot of talent, and I do respect his ability. I don't think he's right on everything. He and I have disagreed on stuff, and that's fine. Marsh is obviously an auditor as well, and she's on the finance committee as well, and I know she's talented. There's a lot of people like them who are involved. I'm not as much of a financial wizard. I mean, I can manage my own finances, and I can say that I'm not deficit spending at my house, but it's one of those things where I think that there's a lot of people in the city that need to be involved. And to be very honest with you, the city's done a terrible job getting us involved, or getting those people involved. Like I said, the gadflies, the guys like us that are involved, we're going to come to all this stuff. But that's my take. There's a lot of unanswered questions. So if this is our first date, I get the fact that we're getting to know each other. We haven't even had our first kiss. I'm waiting for that to happen. But in the reality is, before you propose and before we put a ring on it, we need to have more people show up at the wedding for the ceremony and to sign the witness line, and that's just my opinion.
Heck of an analogy, but thank you.
Well, I'll first start with just the very mundane thing that I was originally going to say, which was on that list, my understanding is the current Quint is about 8 years old. I don't understand why we would need to replace it. It was purchased just before I started getting involved with the city.
Jim, can we take these one at a time? The rule of thumb with your fire department equipment is you'd want to be in frontline service for 10 and reserve status for another 10. This is a 3 or 4 year plan, and I don't know any other way that this city will buy another Quint within the next 2 years. Timing would work out really well.
I see. So you're expecting a 10-year lifespan then on your vehicles. That's the answer. Okay. The other, I just want to comment on one thing that Steve said about the council listening. This predated you and the current council. On the subject of fire department overtime, this existed before I even got involved in the city, and that was 7 years ago now. And people have talked about it forever. If there's one thing that you and the city council could deliver to indicate a modicum of response to the residents of this city, is something actually be done about it. Nothing's been done in all this time. That's basically my request. I think the citizens would really be gratified if there was a feeling that there was a response to the citizens, essentially. That isn't what. No, that. No. Well, that's it. The citizens didn't want that either. I'm just saying, if there could be a deliverable on that subject, it would really go a long way.
I just had a quick question. So you mentioned the budget's going up to City Council in about a month.
Marsha, I can't hear.
Oh, sorry. The budget is going to be up for vote for City Council in about a month, right?
June 15th.
June 15th. This budget will not be part of that motion, right? And will this even be brought up at that meeting, or is this just going to continue as a rolling? Does it require any kind of motion from City Council?
We don't expect this will be in front of City Council at that same meeting the budget gets adopted. We've got some time on this. And,
I just wanted to clarify for everybody.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Last night, Mr. Wu, Councilman Wu, enumerated the means of covering the health department expenses. I believe he said 50% would come from grants, 15% from fees. Can you either confirm and expand on at least to come up to the 100% on that? Okay, is it 10? Yeah, okay. I think he said 15, but I don't want. I'm only kind of going from recollection, so I'm not accurate on it. But I do know that he stated the different means of covering the cost. I was hoping you can maybe share that again with me because it kind of ties into my follow-up.
I can give you a reaction tonight. We're not here with a budget for the health department tonight. There's 12 required components under state law. The one that seems to be self-sufficient in terms of revenues and cost is the environmental health, restaurant inspections, plan checks, and all of that. That's a relationship that could be stood up in fairly short order, and the initial term The idea is that 90% of the revenues would go to the firm that would do the inspections, provide the qualified people to do the inspections. The other pieces, the intention would be to take advantage of state and federal subventions, grants, monies that are entitled to come to health departments under the state budget, but we don't have those numbers for you tonight.
So there, you don't have a percentage. Okay, but grants is not a static, guaranteed source of income for or revenue. That depends on the state, whether it can afford to provide the grants or willing to commit to those grants at any point in time, I would think. So that's not a guaranteed means of support for this project, I would think. The fees, and certainly not like the fees. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Some of these health department related programs are funded by state and federal grants that have been long-standing programs. If you look at the aspect of a health department that tends to family care, women and infant care, the federal WIC program has been in place for years. Do I think that's going to go away? No, I don't. Do I think it's going to go away under this administration? I absolutely don't. So some grants are one-time and transitory and fleeting and disappear, but a number of those programs are reliable and secure and pretty predictable.
Okay. So that aside, since we're not factoring in the health department expenses or whatever revenue is going to be needed to get this off the floor, where does it come into play? Because it sounds to me like we're looking at a June, July effective date for this contractor to take over, or am I all wet here? I'm all wet? Thanks.
Well, I mean, one of the things we said last night, gave a recap of the introductory initial meeting with the state health officials. They've assigned 3 very high-ranking people to respond to the West Covina proposal. It's going to take them some time to react to the city's plan proposal. They made the point pretty candidly, this hasn't been done in more than 70 years, so nobody there has any institutional memory about how any other department was formed at all. The city has a contract with LA County for health department services. A contract is a serious thing. That contract affords the city the opportunity to segue out once a year. You have to give notice by June 1st of intention to leave by July 1st. Do I think the state of California Health Department is going to approve the West Covina Health Department between now and the end of the month? I do not. So do I intend to give notice to the county that we're concluding that contract? I don't see that. I think it's going to take some time to get state approval, and that's going to be a process.
So then why hasn't the staff done due diligence in figuring out how this is going to impact future budgets? Because that's been the concern of residents all along, is we don't have any numbers to say, yay, we can support it, or it doesn't make sense to us. Right now, no one knows what the costs will be, what the benefits, will end up being. So since you really have no target date, then all we can say is, okay, this is going to impact us in the future. We don't know how, but we're spinning our wheels now on it tremendously, and kind of we've made it a priority, and it's really kind of created a schism among residents where I'm saying, from what you're telling me, it's not such a priority because it's a long-term goal. It certainly doesn't seem fall under the definition of a short or medium. Right. We've treated this as a urgent matter. We called a special meeting, and we provided no real hardcore data to support its viability. But yet, tonight, during a budget meeting, you're saying, you know what, it doesn't apply to this budget. It may not apply to the budget next year, and I can't really tell you when it will apply. So it's not, it's only a 600-pound gorilla. I don't know. But why has it been given so much priority? I guess is my real question.
Oh, the direction we've been given is that the health department is a appropriate and necessary response to improve quality of life and health for West Covina residents. The mechanics of how that gets done is going to take some effort to figure out. Let me give you an example. Of the 12 required components, not every health department in this state provides all 12. Some contract for some pieces, do some of those in-house, don't do some of them. I don't think we'll have that defined until we go through a process with the California Department of Public Health.
But you do agree there's a nexus between this health department and future budgets in a very large way.
Well, the department will require a budget once we finish with the process of state reaction to the approach.
Okay.
Ms. Burgess?
Do you mind going back to the slide that says vaccinations? Okay. This may seem like a nitpicky point or not important, but budgets communicate to people who are not budget people. Budgets are planning documents. What really I found when I first saw this slide, the line vaccine point of distribution and response facility repairs. That isn't clear English language for what it really is in listening to it. And when, as residents, we see that, we see game playing. We see insincerity. We see pulling the rug over or whatever that phrase is. I would prefer to see things such as fire stations, maybe then in parentheses put vaccine point. Because it was when you were talking that we learned it was the fire stations. I don't have a problem with
Point made.
fire stations.
Point made, Jerry.
Thank you.
Follow-up question. So, if you don't mind, Stephanie, I know you're probably the expert matter or the person with the most expert on this. In talking about back to small businesses, besides figuring out the criteria, the dollar value or whatever it may be, what other limitations have they put on the American Recovery Act for the use towards small businesses that you can let us know right now?
I won't be able to give you exact limitations, but I can pull quickly kind of broad-based of what it is aiming at in terms of small businesses to help them address financial challenges caused by the pandemic and to make investments in COVID-19 prevention and mitigation tactics, as well as provide technical assistance. To achieve these goals, recipients may employ this funding to execute a broad array of loan, grant, in-kind assistance, and counseling programs to enable small businesses to rebound from the downturn. So those are the types of initiatives that a city could put in place with these funds.
I could give an example of some things I've heard. I know there are millions, there are billions of dollars in this program, and the piece to local government is only one small part of that compared to the whole. If you look at the relationship of the part to the whole, the context is this is the piece for local government, and there's lots of other pieces for business assistance, education assistance. This isn't business's only chance to access these monies. Some instrumentalities of government, tribes have used COVID money toward things like air purification system. so that they could allow safer occupancy within restaurants rather than, be outside underneath canvas and space heaters. I just don't want people to get locked in on the idea that this is the only opportunity to provide assistance for businesses through this federal program. There are myriad programs in this federal bill. It is staggering the amount of money that goes to everybody.
No, and thank you. I understand that there's in $1.9 trillion that the president signed into law, there's a lot of money going a lot of places. I get that. And I know there's a lot of places that, going back to pragmatic approach and ideology, there's a lot of things I don't agree with in it. But, I do think that small business was the most hit in this. We may disagree on certain things, but the one thing is I think that we all agree is small business got hurt the worst. So I'm just kind of looking at what are ways they can do it. So the way that I take your statement, if you don't mind, Mr. Carmody, is that there's many ways for small businesses to get money, but they're probably not going to get it out of this money from the city. Would that be kind of the way you're insinuating that?
I'm trying to craft a package that's appropriate for West Covina and its government that serves its residents. So that's my priority. I want to cure deficiencies. I want to get things to standard. I want to get regulatory compliance. I want to have proper equipment. And this is a city that hasn't been able to say any of those categories are sufficient. So we're trying to quantify problems, solve problems, move on, solve the next. And this might be a way we could solve quite a few of them all at once. So that's where my head is. Trying to advocate for my department.
Respectfully, I understand as a manager or a supervisor, obviously you're going to advocate. I advocate for your employees all the time because I think some of them deserve more and some of them are treated better than they deserve in some cases. But anyways, the next question I had kind of in relation to this, you were having an exchange with JD a little bit about the long-term planning for the health department, and something kind of didn't really set well with me, and he alluded to it, is, we had a special meeting. The council had to vote 4-1 in order to pass an urgency ordinance, and the reasoning given that night was they had to do it before March 1st so that they could sever ties with the contract by June 1 or July 1, whatever date it is, and so the council acted with haste to pass this urgency ordinance, to send a memo to the county to meet their budgetary guideline date of March 1st so that they wouldn't budget accordingly or however that's going to go. And basically listen to a medical doctor give a presentation the meeting before or 2 meetings before. Still saw no numbers, but it seems as though that basically we had the bullet train to a health department on February 23rd or 27th, whatever date that was. And now all of a sudden it seems like that bullet train turned into the Pony Express. That all of a sudden now it's, we don't need to do it so fast. Well, the issue I have is just last night we proceeded forward with things, right? We had a whole slew of people here opposing this, and the meeting before that, we outlined positions. We outlined all these different things. And so, with all due respect, the actions of this city, the actions of this council, and maybe staff as well, because, obviously you're the one that helps set the agenda, the perception is that, it's been the bullet train. And to hear now that it's the Pony Express model, we're going to take our time and that we don't need to have it done by a certain date all of a sudden, then why did we race with all the other stuff? We could have done it without an urgency ordinance. We could have had a very detailed staff report. And I understand that, this is a budget meeting, but this is budgetary related and how we spend that money. And, to get to the race of this bullet train, to get it moving and at the speed that it was moving, at the speed of light, countless hours of staff time, countless hours of staff reports and preparation or lack thereof in some cases, because there hasn't been a single dollar value presented of any form other than just what the people are going to make. But if it's really not a race, if we're not really racing to be up and moving forward by July 1, why did we line everyone up at the starting gate and fire the starting gun? Because that's really what this seemed like. And it's contrary to the way that I look at and see government. And now in a budgetary meeting, we hear, oh, we're not going to budget for it. We're not going to do this because we don't know. Well, judging by the fact that there's never been anything but a 4-1 vote to move forward, I think we do know where it's going. And so to have it not in the budget, to not be talked about, to not be here, to me is a lack of fiduciary duty of this of staff. And I hate to blame staff because they're just doing what they're told, but so I don't really blame them in that regards. But from a leadership perspective, which you're a part of, Mr. City Manager, and from the council's perspective, I just don't understand the mixed messaging, because that's really what this is. It's complete mixed messaging based on what you just told JD. I'm baffled. And you called it an 800-pound gorilla. I think it's more of a 1,200-pound gorilla now, because it's like, what's the answer? And again, I would love to hear an answer, but I'm pretty sure I know the answer. But I'm baffled, and I really am curious.
Ms. Rivers?
I think that actually the city manager did answer your question earlier when he said he was working under direction. But there is a real problem in what I'd call optics, or you might use the word politics or public relations. I mean, there's various words that apply here. But it seems that a lot of people essentially got pretty angry over nothing. And when I say a lot of people, I'm referring to the residents. I mean, I'm sure there's a whole group that's gone out and done this initiative thing. That's a lot of work. I mean, I got up week after week and made little speeches about there should be a project plan before you proceed on something like this, and other people got up and gave their own versions of why they thought it was a poor idea. But the point isn't that. The point is, and actually it goes back to a little speech that Terry Kozad made a couple of council meetings ago, where she said something to the effect of, why can't we all get along here? I think that's what it really is. Because that is the real issue. It isn't about the health department, is it? So, interaction with the community over stuff. And it's true, the council doesn't have to do what the folks want, but I think there should be a modicum of listening on both sides, not just the council side, but the community side too. I really like this meeting because that's what we're doing right now. I don't think we've had a meeting like this in a long time.
I have enjoyed this tonight. This town is blessed with a lot of meetings. I mean, last night was council. Tonight we're doing this. Tomorrow night we're having a joint meeting with the Planning Commission talking about the housing element. So that's a lot of meetings in 1 week. But I'm open to doing this more. Want to have a discussion council or something? You want to have a special night and talk about health department, which wasn't intended to be on the agenda tonight.
I think it would.
I'm open to that.
Yeah. Let me be a little more specific. If the council had been here tonight, I think we could have done a lot of healing. I appreciate the fact that you're here as a city manager. That's great. That's not, but you're not, as you said about the health department, you have to do what you're told. I understand that.
We thought it would be a more informal setting, not to have the council here. I've done this with the city manager in several other cities, and it's always where we felt like the residents could speak more freely. So, I mean, that's on us. If you, in the future, want a special city council meeting, because you can't have all 5 here without having a formal meeting.
There actually is a methodology. Perhaps you haven't had that in your experience, but I have. The council can be present but not participate in terms of, they used to do that in here.
The different council.
Yeah, Robin, if I can say, I agree with you completely. I think them being here tonight would have probably not been such a great idea. My perception is they play defense 100% of the time, so it's kind of hard to communicate.
Okay, all right, I understand. Then the issue is the MO. It's different people.
But I do believe that they could have made the effort to have created other forums and been present without participating and allowed for an open dialogue from residents. That would have met the objective of openness and made people more receptive to the possible idea of a health department. Jim, I'm sorry I interrupted you, so if you have anything else to say, I'll be quiet.
It's fine. I accept the correction to what I was saying. It's fine.
I want to add one other thing that I heard you say, Mr. Harmony. You're a city manager, and true enough, that implies that you work for the city, and your priority are city employees. However, don't forget the city part. Those businesses that may be in the private sector are also your moral obligation. And that, in fact, was the reason the night of the special hearing that Mr. Wu gave for the creation of the health department. In fact, he had quite a few of them show up that night and advocate for it because it was packaged and sold to them on the idea that a health department would, here in West Covina, would not have made them suffer as the actions taken by the county and actually, and to be far more accurately stated, the state of California Health Department. But in any case, that was the selling point for this. So at this point, for them not to be part of this matrix in terms of dollars and cents, I think would be, it just wouldn't be fair. And that's why I vote in favor of more meetings so that word could get out to those stakeholders so that they could come in here and tell you what they did or did not receive in terms of relief and how they can hopefully benefit from some of this federal funding.
Well, let me just say this, because the point's been made a few times now. The council directed that the budget be broadly publicly disseminated. Here we are. You made the point tonight you want some surveys. We can do that. You want another meeting or more meetings? We can do that. We'll get that scheduled.
I didn't hear the part about the private sector. I'm really concerned about the private sector because I think this matrix here leaves them completely out of it.
Can I offer my point of view, and maybe I should have thought this out more, but just from where I'm sitting tonight. This government can't collapse. If somebody has a medical incident in a restaurant, calls 911, I'm in charge of the system of care that follows that. The dispatch center, the new Mark 43 system that enables us to get units on scene so the firefighters can put wet stuff on red stuff so the police officers can deal with whatever crime is going on. That's my job. And so I care a lot about the businesses, but if I don't do that piece correctly, nobody else can. So that's why I'm trying to recommend things that benefit the city organization.
So am I hearing you correctly that without this relief package, we would have collapsed?
I'm not ready to say that. I'm saying these are deficiencies. We've tried to identify deficiencies. We've come up with a pavement management program, and we're delivering capital projects to pave streets. The city went a few years there where it didn't do a single paving job. We're got a new risk management program in place now. This fiscal year ending next month, I think our total loss is going to be very impressive to anybody that's a government geek enough to care about that. And in previous years, absent this good risk management program, the losses were multiple millions of dollars. We're doing well in that category. We did the pension obligation bonds. We had some community conversation about they didn't like some of the means or methods, but we got it done, and it saved the city from bouncing paychecks that fiscal year in September. We would have been negative cash, a couple million in the general fund, hadn't we done it. So we're making good gain in a lot of these areas. We've got a ways to go. I mean, we're just this week signed contracts for our energy projects, $7 million worth of solar panels and light bulbs, citywide. That's a major step for a city, and we're doing it out of the energy savings that we created. There's a lot of good things going on.
Long-term savings.
Yes, sir.
Projected long-term savings.
Sir.
It may or may not pan out. I mean, this is not a guarantee. It's not a guarantee. No, you put a solar panel on your roof. There's no guarantee it's going to pay itself off. Nothing's a guarantee. But
Christmas.
I'm just concerned that if we were operating without all of these things, and many of them really I wouldn't identify as essential. I would say that they are not. It would be nice to have. Some of them we were mandated to upgrade and event that we went county with fire, for example. So there are some things here that were, our wish lists that are now coming to fruition for the city, but at the expense, I believe, of others that may have paid a higher price. So that's, as a resident, I would really like to see, and I know I'm kind of repeating myself here, but I honestly would like to see a little more balanced sort of effort in trying to make right what the pandemic made a city suffer through. And in regards to that, for Ms. Stephanie, I don't doubt by any means that you're a subject matter expert at what you do, but we haven't had a pandemic in quite some time. What was your last project you worked on that you can say had a resemblance to this situation?
Not to a pandemic, but I came from Texas. Specifically, last thing I dealt with was Hurricane Harvey, and we did business grants to those. I was actually in a city that they considered one of the ground zeros for. So I am very familiar with implementing different projects for that. With Harvey in particular, I mean, we got $10 million just wired to us the day after the storm hit. That went to specific response, but we also received over millions of dollars that we infiltrated back into the community as a result, but those were brought in by private matters as well. So that would probably be the closest thing to the federal. I'm very familiar with federal funding, I guess I should say.
I didn't know that. Thank you.
Ms. Butchers?
My very last. I understand what you're saying about your focus being on the city, and I also hear a lot from residents the concern they have for business. Off the top of my head, I cannot remember what is on the city website, but you do have something, I think there was some business assistance. Does that have, I don't remember, references to the federal sources that could provide business assistance so that there is a place that residents and businesses could look for, just referral information? What is it? Barstool even gives out loans. We had that restaurant in West Covina get one. So something like that might just kind of help. Because I understand, I actually kind of agree with you on putting the city first. But,
Bless your heart.
okay. But I also really understand and care about the small business person, and sometimes just getting information out and having a number they could even call at the city, your office, let's say, yeah, we have this on our website or stuff like that. That might help address the residents' concerns with business. Thank you.
I'm going to kind of finish up, I think, my comments, hopefully, unless somebody brings something up that I didn't think about. I do want to thank you for being here. I know you thanked us, and I know there's only 5 of us here, and it's kind of disconcerting as a resident myself. But we appreciate that, and your comment about that this was informative. This is probably the most engaging that we've been able to have with somewhat staff. I mean, some of us talk to staff individually at council meetings and other times, and you and I have had conversations too, Mr. Carmody. So, I mean, it's not like we don't talk, but the idea that you're willing to hold another meeting and preferably with a lot more notice would be very good. Maybe with a little more advertisement somehow. I understand money's an issue, but I do think we need to get it out. I think more people need to know. I think it needs to hit social media. I think it needs to have time to resonate and people to talk about it. So my advice would be, if you are sincere, and I'd like to believe you are, that this is a good thing, and that you want to do more, then I suggest we don't do it tomorrow and give a 1-day notice or a 2-day notice like this was. So that's my first point. So I appreciate that. I do want you to know that, unfortunately, you do have a little bit of a thankless job. I think that with some degree, obviously there's things that happen, and residents, no matter what you do, there's residents that are going to disagree. And so I understand that. And as someone who's been in politics for a while myself, I get it. And I think that residents just want to be heard. I think residents want to feel as though that their input matters. And I know for me, that's what I heard on the campaign trail all the time was they felt ignored and pushed aside. I didn't win. I get it. The person who won is on the dais. I'm not, but still I heard that a lot. And so I think that if there is truth to this, I think what you're saying is good. I agree. I think we need to have a public health town hall. I totally agree with that. I've been saying that since February at the special meeting that this needs to be something. And I think there's a lot more information that needs to come out from the city. I kind of stated from the beginning, and I'm on my soapbox to some degree, that's one of the things that's lacking in the city is communication coming this way. There's just not a lot. And, we're here at a budget meeting, and it's a relatively tame presentation. I know I missed the first part, so if that first part answered some of the questions, I apologize, my tardiness, but I will review it, obviously, and go back. But, that's what we need. That's what this city needs. This city needs a lot. Jim mentioned the initiative on the public health. That could possibly have been avoided if there would have been a lot more communication and a lot more thought out process. Maybe the people who did that wouldn't have had to do it. So, and again, I don't want to harp on the public health because that's not the purpose of this meeting, but it is involved. There's costs involved. There's dollars involved. And to be honest, nobody knows. And if they do know, they're not sharing, put it that way. So, like I said, I would like to see more town halls about this budget. I know you've said you're going to do them. Thank you. I want to see more lead time. And I know that we're supposed to have a fiscal budget in by July 1. And I know that the second meeting in June is the meeting right before the July 1 deadline. But to have our first town hall 30 days out, this is showing us the first budget, but maybe we should have had one a month ago where we could talk about things that we'd like to see in the budget or things that we'd like to see addressed and give you guys that direction, kind of that survey mentality. So just food for thought for next year, for future. 30 days out. I mean, it's May 19th today, and we're going to basically present it to the council on June 15th. It's not even a full month. So just some food for thought on that. I hope the city and I hope you, in your sincerity, will do more on that communication and the council as well, because I think there's a lot of lacking there. So that's, I guess I can say my final comments for tonight. So thank you.
The presentation, the restrictions, so that, because I mean, I heard you as far as salaries and things like that you can't use it, but what is there a itemized list of things that they just cannot be, the funds can't be used for? If it could be presented in one of the slides, I think that would be helpful for individuals like myself that really are not that well informed.
Okay, I can definitely incorporate some of that into the next presentation.
Is there anyone else who would like to speak?
Again, I thank you all for taking your time tonight.